The most underrated team is the Jaguars.
Okay.
They got to the Final 8 last year, and nobody seems to acknowledge that they are on the brink. I was going to say precipice and brink, and it came out brisk. They're on the brink of potentially being very good, and they're in a division that, relatively speaking, is not as strong as the others in the AFC South. They're in the AFC South, and that one is weaker. So I think they're ridiculously underrated for what they can do. And the team that's most overrated, and I know you're baiting me, and I know you're going to be mad at me, but I still don't know why everybody's on the Lions. They started last year 1-6.
Valid point.
You're listening to the Pine Room Podcast, the home of sports, gambling, entertainment, and whatever the hell else has gone on this week. So pull up a seat by the fire, crack open a cold one, and make sure to get your bets in. Welcome to the Pine Room. This episode is sponsored by our good friends at IC Cab. Whether you're in the Ohio Valley, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, Morgantown, or Charleston, you've seen the cars around. IC Cab provides a simple transportation service for all your transportation needs, be it a ride to the Pittsburgh airport, because we all know it's cheaper than parking, corporate transportation, courier services, or just a ride home from the local bar. IC Cab is your way to roll. To book your next ride, call 304-232-1313 or schedule a future ride at iccab.com/contact. Then all you got to do is fill out some info and boom, you got a ride coming your way. Oh, all right, that's me. Give them a call. Tell them the Pine Room sent you. All right, hello everyone, and welcome into the Pine Room Podcast, episode 74. We're here in the studio in a different setup. I'm sitting over on the love seat. But myself, Coach, Matt, and Jarrett, we're just here to give a little bit of a preview of what you're about to watch. We were pleased to be joined in the studio by NBC Sports' pro football talk, Mike FLORIO. He came down after his book signing. His book is on the table. You can see it right in front of here. Father of Mine. You can go purchase it hardcover or ebook on Amazon right now. But these guys got to sit down and talk with him, we just wanted to preface what we're going to get into and what you're gonna see here. So
yeah, it was good. It was awesome. Appreciate Coach making the connection through some of your good buddies that were friends with Mike their entire lives, and we had him on the radio show one time a while back, and actually it was right before the NFL draft, so we talked to him about that, and then he was nice enough to come after his book signing over at the library for Father of Mine. They had a great crowd over there, and he came over and spent about an hour and 15, 20 minutes. He probably would have went a little longer, but we didn't want to overdo it, and we appreciate him spending the time with us. It was awesome, really insightful, and really fun.
Yeah, like I said on the radio today, and I've said it to my buddies before, he genuinely is one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I've ever talked to in my life.
Besides Champ?
Well, yeah, besides Champ. Come on. You didn't even have to say that.
Okay.
But no, just how much he knows about each division, each team, each player, and then outside of NFL, what he knows about Wheeling and the mob scene and everything that went with that. Just really, really cool. I could have sat there. I didn't even have a mic on, and I was running the computer just to make sure everything was good. And I could have literally sat there for the whole day and listened to what he had to say. Just an amazing guy. I appreciate him coming because he really didn't have to do that. And right now, actually, we've had some clips up on our social media. When you hear this, they'll probably all be up by now. You'll be able to hear the whole thing, obviously, if you're listening to this. But we've had a really good response to the video so far. We've had a lot of angry Lions fans yelling at us on TikTok, but it's been really cool.
I didn't realize people dislike him. Like people don't.
Well,
like
who was
him.
that saying that? Was that Soup that was telling us that the Barstool guys beat on him all the time?
Yeah, I guess they just. I think Soup said they what is the word? They
make memes out of him or something.
Yeah, but they meaningfully disagree with him.
They just disagree with him.
Just to provoke him, like not provoke him, but to get him to respond to what they're saying. So I don't think it's like necessarily mean-spirited.
Well, that might be actually a sign of respect, to be honest.
Yeah, it could be.
Oh, definitely.
Coming from those guys.
But I mean, like people, like we put these TikToks out of just clips of what Mike was saying, and like people just every comment, if it's not positive, well, obviously, if it's not talking about whatever he's talking about in agreement with that, it's just. And I'd say probably one of every 10 comments is positive, most of which is just negative. Like they don't agree with him, and he's like he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Said, you can disagree.
Yeah, it's like just because he's saying something that you like, just because let's say I like the Lions, right, and you hate the Lions, right, just because you say something about the Lions doesn't mean you're wrong about them.
And time will tell which one of us is right.
Yeah.
And Coach can attest to this. When we're in here doing Bettor's Last Stand, we don't always agree.
Right.
But the show would be boring if that was the case.
Yeah.
And it would serve no purpose.
Yeah, and if just because he said something wrong, like that didn't turn out, like I think there was one comment about him, something about Jordan Love. What was that?
He was talking about.
I can't remember what it said.
He said Jordan Love might be okay, but he didn't say he was great or that he was terrible.
Yeah, and people were pissed because he said that the Packers will win the division. Which is
interesting take.
Yeah.
That division's wide open. We talk. I think Chris, and Coach, we all had different winners in that division.
And every like saying he's an idiot for.
See, that's just but unintelligent people try to critique guys as intelligent as Mike. That's what happens. That's the best they can do is to just try to trounce him and knock him down. Yeah. But he's not going to care.
And
about
here's
that.
the thing:
he doesn't care.
And I don't even know him. Like before he came here, I had no idea who he was. I would have never known who he was until. So, like to me, the only reason people get all worked up is because they know he's got a platform where and that's it. Like if it was just
still the man.
Yeah, he's a great guy though. He seemed like he really enjoyed. Like I bet you can tell sometimes when people are obviously like Jared said, he didn't need to do any of that. He did not need to come in here and talk to us. He's way above us status wise. So he definitely didn't need to be. But I bet you could tell sometimes with people in his kind of profile when they're talking to people that are below them, they don't care. But he seemed like he genuinely.
I mean, he seemed like he was just on our level and just relaxed. And Coach, you can speak to this a little bit. Just regular guy, like just fun, fit in really well with us.
Yeah, he did, and he was thanks to Jimmy Payne and Terry and Rick. Who grew up as very, very good friends, if not best friends, with Mike Florio when they were young. And they've kept a very close relationship. Now, obviously, with Florio being so busy, and those guys all work too, so they're busy. And but they go down one time a year to his house in Bridgeport, West Virginia, and they say it's just like coming to the Pine Room. They sit around, smoke cigars, watch football, talk. Well, actually, it's not football season, so they're probably watching baseball or just watching anything and just talking and having fun. And he's a great guy, and they sort of hooked us up with him. And I pursued it. But honestly, I would be sitting at home several nights, and I would just get a random text from Florio saying, hey, I'm coming up to my book signing. How about if I stop over to your studio and we shoot the shit for an hour? It wasn't like I begged him and drove him, because I really wanted to stay away from bothering him. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I'll stop over to the studio and, shoot the shit for an hour, and, we'll just talk and do whatever you want to do. And that's exactly how it played out. And he's kept in contact with me. And then as I was waiting for him at the library, he texted me right at the end. He said, hey, what's going on? And next thing you know, I've jumped in his car and drove up here, and we BS'd a while, and then the rest is, you got history. You guys saw him. He was
to hear it.
I think it's kind of it just speaks from the area.
Yeah,
we're all from the area,
yeah.
raised the same type of way. Just genuinely, decent people in our area around here, and he's one of them. And no matter how big he is, he remembered wheeling was important to him, and I'm sure there's a little soft spot in his heart a little bit for people like us trying to make it in the world of media these days. And he's obviously done an incredible job, and his knowledge is just so just vast. And I feel like he enjoyed his time with us. We didn't want to overdo it again, but we got some great stuff, as Jarrett mentioned. I think people will really enjoy some stuff that I wasn't even aware of insight-wise. And, it's just the way that he's plugged in and some of the stories. And I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but just like some of the contacts he has, obviously, that's part of being in that industry. But, he's an incredible wealth of knowledge for NFL. And I'd recommend anybody who doesn't listen to him regularly to start tuning into Pro Football Talk, or at least watch those clips that him and Chris Sims give out every single day, and you're going to feel like you know a lot more about the NFL.
Yeah, and I only have watched maybe a minute and a half of him on his show, and that's just because I don't like sports. But what's the movie? What you see? Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. What you see is what you get. Like he's to me, he didn't it transferred right to here. He didn't change.
The same guy. That's
so
cool,
I know people are gonna. If people watch this, there's gonna be some stuff that he says that everybody's not gonna agree with. But he's just like another one of guy. He's not trying. He's just another one of us.
But like when you understand that you need to respect guys like this guy got where he is now because of his wealth of knowledge, his hard work, and he just gives you another take on NFL football. And honestly, he could talk. I feel like we could have talked to him about a lot of different subject matters.
Yeah.
He's going to be very well versed in it, but he gives you not the typical you're going to hear this on every channel thing, and that's what's so refreshing about him to me. Before we even actually talked to him or met him, that I always respected that about him, is that he gives you a different take. And you might not agree. Like, he opened my eyes. I ended up taking Justin Fields in a fantasy draft the other night. I don't like the guy at all, but Mike said he thinks he's going to be really good statistically in fantasy, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to roll the dice and going to go with the expert on this. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that I agreed, but I'm willing to take his professional opinion and say he's going to know more than I know. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that he's always going to be right and I'm always going to be wrong. But you've got to respect a guy like that. And for him to come sit down in here with a bunch of nobodies like us and treat us like equals, it was really great.
Yeah. Really
couldn't
neat.
Thank him enough for that.
And then the other thing was the neat thing, too, is guys my age or anybody that will listen to this show or heard him speak, guys my age who remember the days of when his dad's bar was down across from Sportsman's, and I used to go to the Club 17, and I remember Butch Florio. I remember him coming into the Club 17. I remember going down that way and going into those bars and making bets, and then I was running spot sheets for Butch Manillo at Club 17 and doing all the things that they were doing, because I was into gambling.
Is there a statute of limitations on that?
No, he already said it. He said it down when he was speaking. He said the statute of limitations all run out on that. Yeah. All right. So so guys my age can relate to those days of growing up where you just walk into a bar and you place a bet. You write it on a sheet of paper and you give it to them, and you come in Tuesday or Wednesday and settle up, and you do it again the next week, and nothing was on a computer. Nothing was, obviously.
Gotta be quick to burn it if you get rated.
Yeah. So
it was up on the chalkboard.
Yeah, well, a lot of stuff was on a chalkboard. It was all your stuff was on a chalkboard, and all your bets were done on a little on a piece of paper that had carbon copy on it. So you gave the bookie one, and you kept one, and you know what was bad, Matt, back in the day? I don't know if you even knew this. The juice back in the day was 6 to 5.
Yeah,
6-5, 1-11-10.
We still get people coming into our shop and say that, like,
it was unbelievable.
I can't believe you guys actually give us a fair chance. Like
6 to 5, and here's the other one on
ties lose
on the totals.
Okay,
a total if a total was 38. Say it was
38 flat. Yep,
38 flat. Obviously, you got the book got the 3-point spread. You had to if it was 37 or 39, it was a push.
Push.
Yeah, and then you had to get a point over the spread to hit the over-under. They had a 3-point cushion and a 6-5 juice.
I mean, how can anybody ever win?
It was unbelievable.
Wait, so if you with the total, so run that again.
If you had 38, you had to get over 39.
Yeah, so if you had to get over, you had to get over. So you basically had to get
39
40.
was a push.
So
39 was a push. You had to get 40. They had 3 point. They had a point on each side.
And if it hit on 38, that it was a loser, right?
It was a loser.
Yeah. Because guys bitch about that still. And
it was unbelievable.
Like, Ties lose with my bookie downtown. Like,
it was
terrible.
That's why you
come here.
And then the juice was 6-5, so it wasn't 11-10.
It's basically
it was
12-10.
12-10.
Yeah. So you're basically leaving 120, minus 120. You know, I always see minus 110. Most of your basis is going to be minus 120. So you're laying 12.
Oh, wow.
Incredible. Back in the day. And those were but they were good old days, man. They were fun. I think when they got busted, that sort of was one of the downfalls of Wheeling because, man, it was everybody would go in a bar. Saturday mornings, we'd go down to Butch's and make our bets. I'd run sheets for them during the week, take them to college and all my buddies, and like it was $2, and he would give me like 20 cents off of each sheet or something, and it was really, really neat. But anyway, I think Florio has a little, soft spot in his heart for that stuff that went on here, and he was part of it, and he saw a lot of things and heard a lot of things. I'm not sure he saw, but heard a lot of things about.
Like he alluded to, just coming across the people that later he realized, this guy's might be the enforcer.
It was great when
this guy sitting next to him, he might have murdered 2 people last night.
Yeah. Well, let's not bore you any longer, and we can get right into the details of what we're talking about, or what these guys are talking about. Thank you to Mike Florio. It means a heck of a lot for him to come here, and it means a heck of a lot to us for him to come and do that for us and talk to us.
This is really cool. This is a great watch.
Enjoy this. Let us know what you think, and go let Mike know that you listen to him on the Pine Room.
And get his book.
Yeah.
Buy his book.
Father of Mine. You can get it on Amazon, ebook or paperback.
Grab some popcorn and a Diet Coke.
Enjoy.
Without further ado,
sit back and enjoy.
Mike Florio on the Pine Room Podcast. You're listening to the Pine Room Podcast, but you don't just have to listen to the podcast. We have some other stuff out there too, like Bettor's Last Stand, our sports betting show covering all things sports and betting. Or Soup and Stuff, where Soup sits down with business owners, athletes, and other professionals for good conversation. Or, if you want to listen to us live, you can tune into the Watchdog, FM 98.1 or AM 1600. Or you can listen live online at thewatchdognetwork.com. You're listening to the Pine Room Podcast.
All right, welcome in to the Pine Room Studios feature with Mike Florio of NBC's Pro Football Talk. Mike just had a really cool book signing and I guess a book event, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Down at the Wheeling, Ohio County Public Library, which was really well attended from what I hear, about 200 people. And he's been nice enough to sit down with us here in the Pine Room Studios. Mike, welcome to the show. We appreciate you taking the time during this really busy part of your season. How's it been so far today?
It's been a great day. As I said at the event, I had 2 major concerns. The first one was no one was going to be there. And I really was surprised, pleasantly, obviously, that many people were there. And my other concern was that it was a sting operation because I took out a book in 1978 and never took it back, and this was the day they were finally going to get me, and that's what they were going to do. So those were my concerns, and both were rectified in a positive way. But it was fun.
You obviously talked a lot about your book. For our listeners that aren't aware of it, tell just a little synopsis about the book and where they can find it and things like that. Father of Mine is the title.
Correct. Mob novel set here in Wheeling, 1973. My dad was a bookie in the Hankish crew. It was funny. Had a running gag the day that I acted like I didn't know who that was whenever his name came up. But 70s and 80s. The book, again, is set in 1973. And it's completely made up, but some of the things that happen in the book, that the crew in the book do, they're based on things that actually did happen. But again, it's all fictionalized. And it ended up being, I think, a good background for a story. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what any book is about. Oh, I'm going to see a movie about this. I'm going to read a book about this. It's still got to have a story that carries the reader through. It can't just meander through a whole lot of nothing. It's got to be, and this is one thing I've learned through reading, and I've incorporated into writing, on every page that you write, you need to give them a reason to turn to the next page. And on that page, there's got to be a reason to go to the next page. And at the end of each chapter, you got to give them a reason to go to the next chapter. And that's the whole challenge of entertaining an audience. You get them captivated, hopefully, by the story, and they just go through it one chapter every night. And short chapters help. In today's day and age, I like to write short chapters and I like to read short chapters. I hate those long-ass chapters where I feel like, is the thing ever going to end?
Chris said the very same thing. He read the book from
I had
the whole book
version, and I was like, this is really great because mentally I'm like, well, all these chapters, 2, 3, 4 pages, and it was still a 428-page book, but my God, I got through it, and maybe it was just because I didn't have like a 40-page chapter. It was great. I like that format.
I want to know how long you had this in the works, because obviously coming from Wheeling and the amount of stories that I'm sure you can tell, how long was this kind of in the prep that you wanted to write this book and really get this out?
Well, what happened was, as I've covered the NFL for 20-plus years now, and I was doing the math on the way up here, how many words I've written about football. It's in the millions because I've worked on it every single day since January 1 of 2004. That's when I made the only New Year's resolution I ever kept in my life, which is work on that site every single day, and I've stuck to it for almost 20 years now. The only problem with it is everything I write today, by tomorrow, nobody cares. All that matters is what I write tomorrow. And by the day after tomorrow, nobody cares about what I write tomorrow. They care about what I write that day. So I wanted to craft something that would be relevant beyond today. And it started with Playmakers, which is my book about the past 20 years in the NFL. It's a series of essays, all very short, 110 essays, and you can fly through it, and it's a puzzle of how the NFL has really operated and some areas where it hasn't operated well. That was easy, because it comes straight from what my day-to-day experience is, and it's something that has relevance beyond today. It's still available, people are still buying it, and the concepts in there still apply. Before too long, it'll be irrelevant. With fiction, if it's well-written, if it's well-received, it endures literally forever if somebody gives a crap, years from now to read it. But from my perspective, and the theory, you ever hear of the infinite monkey theorem?
Yeah.
The infinite monkey theorem stands for the proposition that if you have enough monkeys sitting at a typewriter, eventually one of them will craft Shakespeare.
Right.
So my own personal infinite monkey theorem is if I write enough books, one of them accidentally will not suck. That's what I'm trying to do. So I'm up to 8 now, 9 if you count Playmakers, and I'm just going to keep going. And I enjoy the process. There's something about the process. I get swept away in the process. And that's what I enjoy as much as anything. It's rewarding to me when somebody says, hey, I read the book, I like the book. That's great. I don't care about the money from it. You never make much money writing. But it's the idea that the writing process, I enjoy it, and it is rewarding when somebody reads it and they take something from it. And you can tell they enjoy it. One of my colleagues at NBC, he'd had a few drinks. I ran into him at an NBC event. And he said, hey, man, I read your book. I loved it. And I could just tell he was full of it. I said, what was it about? He said, oh, don't do that to me.
It's Mike, do you go into your own little world when you do things start to come in? How does the process work of, like, do you have a place you go in your house? Does it do you settle into a thinking mode and then one thing leads to another? Is that how it happens with you?
Yeah, it started 3 years ago when I had the idea for Father of Mine. It was based on a weird, bizarre dream I had on the night I turned 55. And I thought the next day, there may be something here. There may be a thread here that I can pull into a story. And the next night I just started writing it. And 2 months later I had a manuscript. And then I did the bulk of the writing sitting outside on my patio. Since then, my barn, and it really is a barn that when we bought the house, it had dirt floor and horse stalls, and it would have fallen down by now if we hadn't renovated it.
That's where you and the Paynes hang out, right?
My nephew came to me with the idea of, hey, you know what? And it started off small, like, hey, I'm going to take out the horse stalls and I'll put down a gravel floor, and we had an extra pool table that didn't really fit in this house. It was from our old house, and it was just kind of sitting there in my garage. I said, I'll put that pool table up. We can put a space heater in. We can smoke cigars when it's wintertime and shoot some pool. One thing led to another, and there were some trees that needed to come down. We have 8 acres in Bridgeport. They took the trees. The guy who took the trees down had a mill, a portable mill. They carved that wood into planks and ultimately turned it into my favorite place on the planet. And I'll go down there any night I can. One of the things that I regret about football season starting is Saturday and Sunday afternoons, I'll go down there for 3 or 4 hours, and I have a spot where I sit, and I open my laptop, and I'll light a cigar, and I'll have a drink, and I just start writing, and I'll write 2,000-3,000 words in a couple of hours and just get swept away into that other world, and it's great. And I don't know if I had the ability to do it all the time. Would I do it all the time? Probably not. There's something special about having that 2 or 3 hours, 3-4 days a week, whether it's I go down there at night or I go on the weekend. That's where I go. That's my place, and that's what I look forward to. Not that, again, my job is not a real job, but it's nice to have something else that is different from what I do all the time, that breaks the monotony and creates something that is a written product that potentially has relevance beyond today.
When you're writing at night, do you wake up when you got to go take a piss or something and things hit you and you're wide awake and your mind's going a million miles an hour?
Fortunately, even though I am now 58, I have yet to be inflicted with the necessity to have to piss in the middle of the night.
You're not drinking enough water.
I'd like to. That's the thing. My son says you should drink more water, and I say I'd rather not piss all the time.
You wait, man.
And he says to me, but you'll live longer. And I said, yes, and all that extra period of my life will have been pissing. So I'll trade the pissing for the life.
So less cab, more water.
Yeah. So what I do is when I have a really good night at the barn, and if I write 3,000, 3,500 words, and I'm really happy with what I've done, and I look back at it, and one of the great feelings about it is I look back at it, it's like, I didn't write that. Like, where the hell did that come from? I would have never thought to write that. When I have that kind of a night, my brain is so activated I can't fall asleep. So it's not an issue of waking up and thinking, oh, I got an idea. Because once I shut it down, I shut it down. But once it's going, it's hard for me to shut it down. If it's really going well, it's hard for me to shut it down.
They talk about how Wheeling was called Little Chicago at that time in your book, and what is the significance of people don't understand of actually what was going on here in the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Well, it's hard to explain it because you had to live it. Like, to me, everything that was going on was normal, and I didn't understand it. Like, when I became aware of what my dad did, I was old enough to understand that this is not legal. And I'd go to his bar, and it's like, why isn't it hidden? Why isn't there a bat cave? Like, it's right there. And I remember thinking, all a cop has to do is walk in. And one day I'm in there, and a cop came down, and my dad went out and talked to him. I'm thinking, oh, here it is. And I'm here, too. They're going to arrest me, too. And I'm like 10. And the cop walked away, and I'm like, they just didn't care. I think what happened was the crackdown of December of 1987, that happened because they deviated too far into the drugs. Not my dad, the broader operation. That and the combination of the RICO law. I was surprised Bill Calabash was there today, but he's the one that brought it all down.
Yeah, he was.
I checked him. I checked him for federal marshals and handcuffs. Yes. Like, dude, I didn't do anything. But the RICO law really gave the feds the power to come in and shut it down here, and Uniontown and Youngstown and every town that wasn't New York, Chicago, and even in the big cities. It gave them the weapon they needed to take down the mob, and now it's all been eradicated. I mean, hell, I never would have written this if I wasn't pretty damn confident that it's all gone now, and all the ones who did it are long since dead.
Yeah, and as an older guy, like I'm actually older than you and older than all these guys, I lived it too, because I gambled when I was young, and I went into the Club 17 in Warwood. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Butch Manello, and because he talked about your dad. Actually, your dad had been at the Club 17 before in Warwood.
See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and I used to run spot sheets for Butch Manello in school at college, run spot sheets, and we would go in there and play spot sheets. And I was like you, it was just all normal. It wasn't anything hidden. They weren't hiding anything. It was just out in the open, and I thought it was a wonderful time in Wheeling. I thought it was awesome. Things were booming, and I want to ask you a question. And people have told me this. the mob, and you may not know the answer to it, but probably have heard, the mob actually was very good for Wheeling. They took care of the Little League baseball teams. They took care of people. They just kept things clean in Wheeling. Is there truth to that?
They took care of people. And they took care of people. That's the problem. If you take away the murders, they were great, right? Other than the fact that they killed people who got in their way, it was one hell of an organization, let me tell you. It's like the Cub Scouts with, Tommy guns. Yeah. So, and again, I didn't know that extent of it. Some of the names, some of the guys I knew, when I started thinking about writing this book, and I started poking around what the Hankish crew had done, the different stories out there, some of the stuff that made its way into Father of Mine, even though it's fictional characters, it's similar events. I would have never gone around those guys.
That's what
I never would have gone to the bar. I never would. I was like, holy shit, he kills people? That guy that always says hi to me, he kills people?
That's staggering. We've never witnessed anything like that.
And I didn't know it at the time. There was a vague sense that it was kind of an unspoken, there's something more there, but I don't know what it is. All I know is my dad takes bets. But then as I got older, it's like, oh, geez, holy shit. Like, man, I would have never left the house.
Mike, what was the territory like? Like, what area did that crew control? Or if you remember,
I didn't know. I never knew.
You just didn't know how wide it was. Or
I just assumed it was all of the Northern Panhandle. I just assumed there were bookies all over the place, and the bookies kicked a percentage up to Paul, and I just assumed it was just this general area. Because Pittsburgh's got its thing, and once you get too far into Ohio, they'll have their thing. Youngstown had their thing, so I just assumed it was, kind of like as far as the TV signal carries, that's probably the area that they had.
Okay.
No, and in the book, Ohio was a place where guys went to die.
Yeah, and I didn't, and that's right. They take him to Ohio. They took him to Sally Buffalo Park in Caddis. That's completely made up. What I did was, I just had this idea that their habit is going to be they're going to take guys to Ohio and kill them and bury them, or if they're already dead, they're going to take them there and bury them. And I just pulled out a map. And I was like, well, where's a good place where you could go bury bodies? And I found this Sally Buffalo Park in Caddis that I had never heard of. And it's like, you know what? This works. And this will be the place where this crew takes their bodies and buries them.
Yeah. And that's what it took me back to my childhood as well. Because you had references in there about Stone and Thomas, the tea room, Burger Chef, even the Columbia Record House.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was that real easy for you just to go back? I mean, that's 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah, but I remember all that stuff. And I remember my mom taking me to the Stone and Thomas tea room and how it did feel like something special, like something different you wouldn't expect to see in Wheeling. And, the ladies were in there dressed up, shopping. I mean, it was just a different vibe than what you would see nowadays. And Stone and Thomas was a special place to go. We just went what is it now? It's like an urgent care center or something like that.
Medicine.
But I lost my train of thought. Burger Chef I used to go to all the time. What else? What else did you say?
I just was Stone and Thomas, and then
there was one other thing that
Columbia.
the records.
Yeah.
The guy in the book that tells the story about having the special pair of pants that he could stick the records into and then they'd fence them. That's one of the things I found. One of the guys that was one of Paul's heavies had this pair of pants. And he would go into the record stores, and he would steal the records and stick them down in the pants and walk right out the door.
Oh, my.
And those big 12-inch, those big 12-inch vinyl shrink-wrap records, I mean, that's some big-ass pants. And he would stick them in his pants and walk out.
I thought an interesting part of your talk today was how you sort of became interested in the NFL and realized how big it was when you were talking about your mother. Because I remember that story, Terry Payne and Jimmy Payne and those guys told me about going to your house, and you had to immediately take your shoes off, and the couch was covered with plastic. And I thought the story you told about the Immaculate Reception that day was intriguing, about sort of sparked your interest in the NFL must be something special. Talk a little bit about that. I thought that was really fascinating.
I'll never forget it. December 23, 1972. The NFL in that period of time blacked out all games within a 75-mile radius, even if they were sold out. They later, under pressure from President Nixon, changed that rule, and it shifted to only if the game wasn't sold out 72 or 48 hours before kickoff was it blacked out locally. All games were blacked out locally. Somehow, some way, we were the only house in the neighborhood that had that game that day. I don't know what it was. I don't know whether we had some special antenna. I don't know whether it was our cable system, but there was a station, I think, out of Youngstown that had that game. And all the grown-ups in the neighborhood, at least the ones who cared about the Steelers, they're in the house. And I was amazed. I mean, like, they got their shoes on. You can't have your shoes on. And the plastic's off the couch. Like, the Pope's not among this group.
Right, who were the three people?
It was the Pope, the President, or Tom Jones. Those are the I made the exception for. And I just couldn't believe it. Just the fact that my mom allowed it, and then the reaction when Franco scored, the way that room full of grown-ups started yelling and hollering and screaming like little kids, that's when I thought, if this is enough to make them act like we act when we're excited about something, there must be something about this worth paying attention to. And that was the moment where I decided I was going to pay close attention to the NFL.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
And back to the book, and I it was basically a relationship between a father and a son, and I thought the most touching part of that book was toward the end when
don't spoil it. He hasn't finished it yet.
Just talking about the note that he left behind for his dad, and I thought that was awesome, and it just made me think that any of us that would have an influential father could write that type of note for them, and that was powerful. I thought
the journey of the character Johnny is guy who goes from being completely disconnected and detached from his adult son because he had walked out of the house when the son was 10, and the mother had remarried, and the son had taken the name of the new husband. That was the thing that stuck in Johnny's craw, and he couldn't get past it. And his attitude was basically, I don't care what you do. And over the course of the book, he develops an interest against his own nature, and he grows in that way. You have to have your main characters grow in some way. And his growth is, I'm going to set aside that acrimony and that resentment, and I'm going to give a crap about my son, and then that culminates in. Don't spoil it. No spoilers.
We'll blur the whole.
I set it up so early on. I mean, this isn't. You see it in chapter 2 or 3. There are two main characters, a father and son. One of them gets killed, and you find out at the end which one got killed. And some people who read it, and who knows, maybe this is what happens, will say to me, you're just setting us up, and it's somebody else who gets killed. It's not one of those two guys. So when that was mentioned to me by someone who was reading it, I was like, well, keep reading. We'll find out.
Chris, you said you liked the ending. You liked the way it ended.
I approve of it.
Good.
And how do you pronounce Johnny's last name?
Well, I've always been intrigued by, when I read a book, if there's a name in there, when you see it, you don't quite know how to pronounce it.
Exactly
there's something exotic about it, and there's something appealing about it. One of my favorite books is No Country for Old Men. I don't know if you've seen the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent movie. Anton Chigurh is the villain. Very memorable, excellent, Oscar-winning role. And when you see the book, it's like, what the hell is this name? And that's what I tried to do. So it can be Masogni, it can be Masogni, it can be whatever you want. And as a lifelong Italian whose last name has been bastardized and misspelled 50 different ways, even though it's not all that difficult, right. I kind of like the idea of having some Italian last names in there that people aren't going to know how to pronounce.
I figured it was probably Masogni, but
it's a town in Italy too. All the last names in there, all the Italian last names are towns in Italy. I just pulled up on Google or wherever. I got a list of all the towns in Italy, and and they'll speak to you. It's like,
which one
I like
looks
that
good
one.
as the name?
I like the sound of that one.
You should have thrown in a random city from Ohio for a last name in there for an Italian one.
Well, we got that in there with the place where the bodies were born.
Yeah.
So, cool. Chris, any other questions about the book?
No, I was curious when you mentioned in the acknowledgments about your agent had some influence on that from start to finish. What you mentioned? Like he had some suggestions that you first resisted, but then you accepted them, and you thought it was a better book. Was he speaking from was that in his background or anything?
I think every good agent has to be an editor, at least from the standpoint of giving the client some advice on what they need to do. And one of the most important things you can do as a writer, and I really think in any creative field, art, anything, you've got to be able to literally and genuinely and completely set your ego aside. And you can't allow pride to get in the way of making whatever it is you're working on better. And what I did when I finished the first draft, I told myself, this is good enough. I'm moving on to the next one. I'm moving on to the next one. And I used to not like going back and revisiting what I'd already written. But then I learned through his urging and through his pushing and through his persistence, I have to keep asking myself, is there a way I can make this better? Is this truly the best work I can do? Because you got one shot with it. Once it's done and once it's finished, you can't go back. It's done, it's over, and it's out there for the world. And that's what got me to change the narrative style from straight third person all the way through, like most books are written, into first person for Johnny, first person for JJ, first person for Leslie, first person for Jimmy Dacey, who is not a big character in Father of Mine, but he is a major character in the sequel. And it just kind of, that made it, I think, as you're reading it, it's kind of a puzzle that the reader has to solve. Now, the name of the character is at the start of each chapter. When I first did it, I was like, you know what? You'll figure it out.
And that made it easier for me to follow when I saw it.
But at first I thought, I'm just not even going to put the names there, because you'll figure it out by the circumstances, the way it's written, the voice of the character, you'll know who it is. But I hired an editor to help me get it into final form, and she said, you should have the names there. And I put the names there, and it made it better. It made it easier. You don't want to frustrate the reader. You don't want the reader to be pissed off as you're trying to get them to keep reading your book.
So, Mike, you alluded to a sequel coming down the road. What's the time frame for it? How far along are you so far?
Well, the sequel has been written, but what I did was, and I'm going to be rude here and put my feet up.
No, please do. Make yourself at home.
I got old man knees.
You should see some of the other stuff that's been on that table.
So maybe I should take my feet off. So after I wrote Father of Mine, I almost immediately started writing the sequel that is named Son of Mine. It picks up the moment Father of Mine leaves off.
Okay.
And it's more ambitious. It's got 3 separate storylines that all happen independently, but they fit together. And at the end, all 3 planes land at the same time, even though 2 of them play out in 1973. The other one plays out in 1975, 2 years after the events in Father of Mine. And it all kind of comes to a conclusion. The problem is this. A couple of months ago, I hadn't looked at it since I finished it, because I finished it and I went on to the next one. And the next one was 30 America Avenue, which I talked about today, which is based on the Moundsville prison break from 1979. It is the movie.
That's going to be.
It's Stand By Me on steroids and meth. I didn't want to mention meth. Blue hairs. I don't think they know what meth is.
Well, you said crack. Or was that?
I said crack.
Yeah,
I did say crack. I split the difference between
But you didn't want
steroids
to
and
say
meth.
meth?
I figure crack. They've heard crack back in the 80s, from Nancy
Meth's
Reagan or
new
something.
age. Yeah.
So anyway, that's very disrespectful. All those little old ladies came out there, and I'm saying that kind of shit. What kind of an asshole are you to do that? I'm just kidding.
I tell you what, I felt.
If any of them listen to this, I'm just kidding. I appreciate that they all came.
So now that we're on a podcast, tell us about the smell in the prison. What? Because I know you probably have a much more. Many more expletives to explain what the smell. Because we actually did a podcast from the penitentiary and went through a tour of it. But that smell obviously was gone. What would describe the smell?
Well, Leslie Fitzpatrick in Father of Mine visits her dad, who's in prison for felony murder because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time when somebody got killed during one of their stick-up jobs. And she doesn't get into detail. She just says that smell, and she can't wait to get away from that smell. And it's a smell that she experienced nowhere else, and she holds her breath, and it's horrible, and it's awful. Now, in 30 America Avenue, that book is 2 competing storylines, which consist of, and I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about the book so this makes sense. And I don't want to go on and on and on, but as I say that, I'm going fucking on and on and on. So what happens in 30 America Avenue, 14 guys break out of the Moundsville pen, which actually happened in 1979. After that is what didn't happen. After that, a group of 4 of them end up in the neighborhood where I grew up, and they infiltrate and hunker down in the house at 30 America Avenue. And there is no house at 30 America Avenue. There never was. So it was the perfect location for the book. And it's 4 kids, and I'm kind of one of the characters, although the other 3 guys are just kind of like hybrids and composites of my friends that I knew at that age. So the 4 boys get caught up with the 4 criminals who end up in this house, and one of their friends gets captured. One of the 4 gets captured, and the other 3 end up trying to save him. And I say all that because the story comes from the perspective of one of the 4 kids. That's one chapter. The other chapter is one of the guys who was involved in the prison break, who is telling his story years later, and it's a transcript of his interviews. So it's written as if he's talking to whoever it is that's coming to interview him. And I say all that, and I finally am going to make my point. He describes the smell in the prison as a combination of piss, shit, blood.
That's what I figured.
Right? Other bodily fluids.
Yes.
You know, and it's just this horrible, nasty funk. And I'm telling you, the security at that prison was horrible. They had escapes all the time. They didn't wear uniforms. They did not wear uniforms. They had cells that did not lock. And they would go out and leave their cell and do all sorts of nasty shit and kill each other. Yeah. So what I tried to create for that book, and I mentioned Anton Chigurh earlier, I love a memorable villain. And the villain in 30 America Avenue, his name is Apophis Mammon. And he is the most evil, twisted, warped, manipulated character I could come up with, who is part vampire, part cannibal.
Oh, my.
And it's probably over the top, but I think it works.
Apophis, awesome. You said?
Apophis Mammon. Apophis is the Greek god of chaos.
Right, okay.
Wow.
So, and there's chaos everywhere he goes.
Yes. And Mike, I wanted to ask you one last question about Father of Mine. Then I know we wanted to pick your brain about some of this football stuff. Here's a scenario for you, and I want to see what route you would take. Netflix comes to you and says, Father of Mine and Son of Mine, we want to make a series about it. 2 or 3 seasons. Warner Bros. Comes to you and says, we want to make movies. Would you go TV route or would you go movie route?
Well, that's a great question. That is a great question. If you do a series, it can be much more true to the book, because that's the problem with a movie based on a book. They can't do it all, and they can't do it right. Remember, they finally did Lord of the Rings, and they did justice to it, and what was it? 3 3-hour movies, for crying out loud, to do justice to the books, and even then it wasn't complete. So I would be more inclined, since I have other stuff that could be developed into a film, I would be inclined to go between TV. Father of Mine and Son of Mine. You could get 3-4 seasons out of it and really do it the right way. And I talked to some folks at NBC about it several months ago. It's a slow process. It's a subjective process. They've got the writer's strike now. But my hope is, and this goes back to the infinite monkey theorem, one of these books I write is going to do well, I hope. Yeah. And then that's going to lift them all. And people who are in a position to make those decisions about what money they're going to spend on what projects are going to say, hey, you know, this stuff, maybe we can do something with this. Maybe we should be doing something with this.
Yeah, that's badass.
Good question, Soup.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, Mike, I wanted to go back just real quick on that Playmakers book. What is that one about? You say it's 20 years of just NFL.
What it is, I broke what's happened in the NFL over the last 20 years into 10 different categories, and within each of those categories, I have 10 to 15 essays that just look at specific stories that I covered over the last 20 years. Big stories in the NFL. Mike Vick and his dog fighting. What else? There's so much in there. Without in front of me, I can't even remember it now. But just all the different controversies, all the crazy things that have happened in the NFL. I think we did a chapter. I don't think it ended up on the cutting room floor. There was a chapter based on a running back named Ontario Smith, who, to beat drug tests, had a fake penis.
I remember that
he put clean urine through so he could
pass
that thing
the drug test.
It was a
Whizzinator? Yeah.
Whizzinator. And because of that, the guys who sold it went to prison. Because that device in and of itself is used to circumvent federally mandated drug tests. Wow. And they got prosecuted and went to prison.
Didn't he get stopped in the airport, Mike?
He was in the airport.
Yeah. Wow.
And they're looking through his bag. And, I mean, what do you do? They opened your bag. Sir?
You say you found it.
Yeah,
you found it.
Incredible. Ontario Smith. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
4th round pick from Oregon.
Yeah.
Steal of the draft. Great year for the Vikings in like 2003. But then, yeah.
The Wizened.
And it's so funny because they don't even care about it now. And they've changed the NFL's policy to the point where as long as you're clean for that one test a year when training camp starts, you can smoke all year long. They don't care anymore. But back then, Ricky Williams, Ontario Smith, all those guys, they'd get run out of the league and they wouldn't let them back in.
Let me ask you this, if you think this is controversial. I got the Steelers at 14-3 and going deep into the playoffs. How do you feel about that?
That's a bold take. 14-3 is bold. Now, they could go deep into the playoffs and not be 14-3. I'd maybe dial it back to 11-6.
I'm okay with that, too. Thank you.
But the thing about the Steelers, and this is just my loose experience living in and around Pittsburgh my whole life. I practiced law in Pittsburgh for a few years. Wheeling is close enough to Pittsburgh. You don't even realize how close it is to Pittsburgh when you're growing up here. I mean, it's an hour drive. We never went there. It's just weird. Like, I remember the first time my friends and I drove up to a Pirate game. It's like, why haven't we been doing this? It's just an hour. So, anyway, when the Steelers are expected to be really good, they fall short.
Yeah.
When they're expected not to be good, or you really don't know what to make of them, they end up being better. And if Kenny Pickett has a high ceiling and he can move in the direction of that ceiling, and they just throw the ball to George Pickens. I go on 93.7 The Fan up there every Wednesday at 3:35 Eastern, and I've told them, and some Steelers fans get mad when I say this, but it's not meant to be a slight to the team. Chase Claypool was showing potential attributes to be a great receiver. They just didn't throw him the ball enough. Right. So George Pickens has it. If he's covered, he's not covered. Throw him the ball, he'll go get it. Force teams to put 2 guys on him, and once they're consistently putting 2 guys on him, it's going to open up the rest of your offense, and away you go. And the key for Kenny Pickett, this came up today about how great he can be. The truly great quarterbacks are the ones who, when the play that's called goes to hell, they can make chicken salad with their brains or with their legs or both. When the defense has an answer for what you plan to do, what can I do? Because some can't do it. Kirk Cousins can't do it. A lot of the quarterbacks can't do it or won't even try. Patrick Mahomes is the gold standard, the guy who can make chicken salad out of chicken shit. Josh Allen can do it. Joe Burrow can do it. If Kenny Pickett can do it, he's going to be a top 5, top 7 guy.
That's what I'm talking about, Mike.
That's why I said the Steelers were so good, because of Ben Roethlisberger. He could
extend plays with his legs. He didn't run a lot, but he extended plays with his legs.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was so hard to sack.
So hard
to get down.
All right, Mike, general question. What's the toughest division in the NFL and the weakest division in the NFL?
The weakest division right now is the NFC South. All 4 teams last year were below 500. The Buccaneers were 7-10, and the other 3 teams were 6-9.
Yes.
6-11.
Agree with that totally.
And one of them is going to win the division. I may be wrong. It may be 8-9 and 7-10. I think that's what it was. Bucks were 8-9. Everybody else was 7-10. Somebody's going to win the division. Somebody's going to host a playoff game, and maybe they get lucky, and maybe they get hot, and who knows. The toughest division is the AFC East. And the problem this year for the AFC East, those 4 teams, in addition to playing each other twice, which is 6 games right there, great teams you got to face 6 times out of 17. Because of the way the NFL does its schedule rotation, they've got 2 different circles that spin. And you just kind of click, click, click every year.
Right.
Okay, this year it falls on the teams of the AFC East play every team of the AFC West. And while that clicks through the other 3 divisions every year, it goes west. If you're in the East, it goes west, central, west, north, south, west, north, south. In the other conference, east, west, north, south, it clicks there. So the way it's fallen this year, where you play all the teams from 2 different divisions, AFC West, NFC East, which means every team in that division has to play the Chiefs, has to play the Eagles, to play the Cowboys, has to play the Giants, has to play the Chargers. 5 right there. On top of the 6, that's 11 games. So I say all this because the only team that may get to the playoffs out of the AFC East is the team that wins the division.
Wow. Yeah, because they're not going to be able to get that wild card.
Because when it's time to compare your record to second place, third place team from other divisions that aren't playing the Chiefs, Cowboys, Eagles, Giants, Chargers this year, it's going to be a little easier.
Absolutely.
To beat out the second place team from the AFC East.
Oh, man.
So the second place team from the AFC East could be good enough to go to the Super Bowl and may not get into the playoffs.
What's the most overrated team and the most underrated team, do you think?
Well, the most underrated team is the Jaguars.
Okay.
They got to the final 8 last year, and nobody seems to acknowledge that they are on the brink. I was going to say precipice and brink, and it came out brisk. They're on the brink of potentially being very good, and they're in a division that, relatively speaking, is not as strong as the others in the AFC South. They're in the AFC South, and that one is weaker. So I think they're ridiculously underrated for what they can do. And the team that's most overrated, and I know you're baiting me, and I know you're going to be mad at me, but I still don't know why everybody's on the Lions. They started last year 1-6.
It's a valid point.
And is it just because my producer asked me this today when we were doing our show PFT Live? We were talking about the NFC North and how the teams are going to finish. And I've got Bears 4th, Vikings 3rd, Lions 2nd, Packers 1st. I think people are just enamored with the Lions because it came down to Week 18, last game of the year, Sunday Night Football. Hey, Lions, entertain us. Knock Aaron Rodgers out of the playoffs. Let's see if you can do it. And they did it. So everybody's like, oh, we like the Lions now. Watch out for the Lions. Well, the Jaguars did more than the Lions. The Jaguars got to the playoffs. They won their division Week 18. They came back from 27-0 down to beat the Chargers. And they gave the Chiefs kind of everything they could handle.
They did. Yes.
Now, it helped that Patrick Mahomes got injured.
Hurt.
Yeah, but I think the Jaguars have the potential to be a very, very good team, and I think they should be the team that people are like, hey, the Jaguars, watch the Jaguars. And now the Lions are getting next Thursday night, first game of the season. A few Thursdays after that, they go to Green Bay on a short week. They play both of their games on a Thursday this year against the Packers. And, you know, if you're the Packers, if you're the coach of the Packers, you just kind of sit back and say, this is great, because nobody thinks my guys are going to be good, so I don't have to worry about my players getting a big head. And I can use the fact that nobody thinks they're going to be any good to kind of, get a chip on their shoulder.
A little bit,
The Lions don't have that.
Right.
They can't say us against the world. They can't
Not
say
anymore.
the Lions against the world. Everybody's on the Lions. So I just think we've seen this before. It's kind of what Sean Payton was saying about the Jets. Remember when Sean Payton had those comments a few weeks back? You got to prove it. You got to do it. And what have the Lions done at any point since George H.W. Bush to merit this presumption that they're going to get to the playoffs and start winning playoff games?
I know you like the Packers to win that division. Do you trust Jordan Love, or do you just trust the Packers as an organization to get it done? Because Jordan Love could go out there and throw for 2,500 or he could have struggled this year.
Well, he could. And we don't know what we're going to see in Jordan Love, but what we are going to see is a guy that the Packers thought enough of in the 2020 draft to trade up to get him. They didn't just sit there and let him fall to them. I am told that what the Packers wanted to do that draft, they wanted Justin Jefferson, he was gone. They wanted Brandon Ayuk, the receiver who's with the 49ers. 49ers traded up and got him. Plan C wasn't draft another receiver. Plan C was, let's go get Jordan Love.
Awesome.
Let's get somebody we'll groom to be the successor to Aaron Rodgers. So Love sits 3 years. Rodgers sat 3 years. We don't know what Jordan Love is going to be.
No.
The thing about Jordan Love that I saw in the preseason that I liked, he's a guy with a strong arm. Trey Lance. Problem with Trey Lance, he doesn't have any pitch other than his fastball. Jordan Love, if you saw any of the preseason highlights or any of the games against the Bengals, guys open in the end zone. He throws a nice little rainbow, touch pass right in. Then there's a guy, tight window, zips it in. Having the presence of mind to know what pitch to throw while you're in the middle of all that
very
shit.
important,
That's important. So I just think that the Packers were good before Aaron Rodgers. The Packers have consistently been a very good program for 30 years now. They're just not suddenly going to lose their way without Aaron Rodgers. I think we need to give their history over the last 30 years more credit, and we need to give the Lions' history over the last 30 years more scrutiny before we start saying Lions win that division and Packers end up in fourth place.
Sticking in the NFC North, thoughts on Justin Fields? He's getting a lot of love, but then there's a lot of haters too. I just don't. I think he's an incredible athlete, but I just don't see, like you just mentioned about Jordan Love having some touch on his passes. I
like
don't
Justin
see it
Fields
with
should be a
Justin
running
Fields.
back.
Yeah, he's at highlight reel, but he makes a lot of mistakes. And can he throw the ball enough for the Bears to be good? You obviously have him last, so you don't.
Well, I still think he's going to be good.
Okay.
Not that anybody gives a shit about my fantasy teams, nor should they. But Justin Fields is my QB1 in both leagues.
I think that's a good move there for fantasy.
Now,
Can it win games? Right?
he is Michael Vick.
Got it.
He is that guy who once a game is going to take off with the ball and outrun everybody.
Sure.
And he's the most dangerous running threat of all quarterbacks right now in the NFL. The question is, what can they do this year? What can Luke Getz, the offensive coordinator, do to enhance his passing game? And when I saw their preseason game where he threw a couple of short passes, one to DJ Moore, one to Khalil Herbert, and it was just short pass and off he goes. My first thought was, week one, they're going to be throwing the ball down the field, and this is the effort to draw people up the line of scrimmage because you think it's going to be a lot of short passes.
Sure.
He's going to come out week one, and he's going to start firing rainbows. And he's got DJ Moore. He's got Chase Claypool. He's got guys who have been there in the past. Darnell Mooney. They, I think, have the potential. I don't know how good their defense is going to be.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be good enough to win games consistently, but I think there's a chance Justin Fields does something like what Jalen Hurts did last year in his
fun to watch.
Oh, man.
And Justin Fields is a better runner than Jalen Hurts.
Hey,
I like him in fantasy.
One more general question. Give me a coach that gets the coach that gets the most out of his players and the coach that gets the least out of his players.
Mike Tomlin gets the most out of his players without question.
Okay.
Without question.
Interesting.
And I know other coaches who have ended up with Mike Tomlin players. Not Antonio Brown, other players. Antonio Brown's too easy.
Right.
Other players who go to other teams, and the coach is like, what in the hell did Mike Tomlin do?
How did he do it?
To keep this guy from being a complete and total pain in the ass? I can't believe what Mike Tomlin was able to do. So I'll say Tomlin. Now, the other side...
Standard is a standard, baby.
Yeah. It's hard on the other side because we got some new coaches that we don't know what they're going to do.
Give me some veteran guys that you...
I mean, guys who don't get enough out of their players.
Mike McCarthy.
He comes to mind.
Now,
because these guys...
The question is, how good are the Cowboys players, though? I think we assume they're better than they are. But that would be an example of a guy who, be careful what you wish for. They fire Kellen Moore. Mike McCarthy's running the offense now.
Yeah.
I don't know how much pressure he's under, but he's under some pressure because it's him this year on offense. Brandon Staley's a guy that I really like, and I hate saying this, but you look at his talent.
Yeah.
You got to do more with that
last
talent.
year's playoff
do
game.
More with Justin Herbert. One of the problems with the Chargers, they get too many guys injured, and at some point, it's not just bad luck. At some point, it's nutrition, it's training, it's flexibility, it's all the things that allow a guy to get twisted up into a pretzel. I used to sit next to Rodney Harrison when we'd watch games at NBC. He's out on the road now, so he's no longer in the studio. And Rodney Harrison's superpower, among the fact that he was one of the biggest hitters of all time, an incredible athlete, he can watch all the games that are being played, and he can spot the potentially serious injury as it happens. And he would take his right arm and swing it into my chest, and he would say, watch that one. And you see a guy get all twisted up in knots, and he pops right up. And for some teams, they know how to get these guys ready to get twisted into compromising positions and not get injured. And when you have the Chargers every year, and this is a dated reference that you guys will get, I call the Chargers the Roseanne-Roseanne-Danas of the NFL because it's always something. It's always something, and they never come to fruition, and and it's always something, and usually it's one injury after another. So I think Brandon Staley is really got to turn that team around this year because the vultures are already circling because of Justin Herbert.
Yeah,
and one of my big picture takes about the NFL, when you've got a great quarterback, especially a young quarterback, you're better off having a coach with an offensive background, because if it's a defensive coach, you bring in an offensive coordinator and he does really well with your quarterback, and guess what happens?
Yeah.
He gets a head coaching job somewhere else, and then you got to replace him. Look at the Bills.
Yeah.
Brian Daboll was doing great with Josh Allen. Then in comes Ken Dorsey, and they regress because you have a defensive head coach. And that's a team There's an issue there. Something's going on there. Something doesn't feel right.
Yes.
If they don't make the playoffs this year,
Buffalo.
that may be where ownership says, we got Josh Allen for how many more years? How long until the window closes for him? We need a coach who's an offensive coach. We need to get better players around him. Our window is closing. Right. The Dolphins and Jets are both better than the Bills on paper this year, position by position. If you do tail of the tape check marks, the Dolphins and the Jets are better than the Bills, but they still have Josh Allen, and I think if they don't make the playoffs this year, there could be some big changes. GM, head coach, maybe both.
Yeah.
And they try to put something together while they still have a great quarterback.
Is Diggs becoming an issue for them, a serious issue, do you think?
Well, it's funny. The NFL's official slogan is football is family. And I say the slogan should be is football is business, but we say football is family because it's good for business to say football is family. That's the real that's the real slogan. But the other slogan is nothing to see here. Because anytime anything happens, they say nothing to see here. And when the stuff happened with Stephon Diggs in June, the mandatory minicamp, he was there, then he wasn't. What's going on? I'm concerned he's not here. I'm fine he's not here. Now he's back. Nothing to see here. Mm-hmm. No matter what they do, and they had a preseason game this past weekend against the Bears, and Stephon Diggs caught a slant pass, and he wanted to break it, and he did, and he came to the headline, he slammed his helmet down. It's like, dude, it's a preseason game. That fire that caused him to act up and gesticulate in the face of Josh Allen, and it boiled over. If they struggle this year, that's coming back. And after this season,
he had that issue.
He's going to want out
in Minnesota, right? Yeah.
Hey, the day Kirk Cousins signed his second contract with the Vikings is the day that Stephon Diggs tweeted his way out of Minnesota, and it was not a coincidence.
I want to ask you about my most underrated quarterback, at least I think. What do you think about the Giants and Daniel Jones? I think they take a huge jump this year. I think they win that division, but I'm a huge fan.
That's a hell of a jump.
I'm a huge fan of Jones.
2 jumps. The Steelers at 14-3.
Now that Daniel Jones has learned not to trip over the 5-yard line, that's progress. And he's got that mobility just enough where he can make chicken salad on the fly. They've added help for him. They found a way to work things out with Saquon Barkley. Darren Waller, who's already a team captain. Of course, they have 10 captains. Like, at a certain point, right, it's participation trophies.
Right.
Like, captain needs to mean something. They have 10 captains. Darren Waller is one of them. He could be great for them this year. They have upgraded the receivers. Daniel Jones is another year working with Brian Daboll. I agree with you. They could be better than they were last year. The key is offensive and defensive lines. When the Giants have been great, they've had great offensive line, great defensive line. If they can get that under control, they could be very good.
Yeah, Mike, one more question about quarterbacks, and I heard this on Dan Patrick today. Can Sean Payton fix Russell Wilson? The question was posed: Can Russell Wilson play his way out of a Hall of Fame?
He can. Well, Shereen Williams, who's one of my writers at PFT, is one of the Hall of Fame voters, and in the latter years of Eli Manning's career, she said he needs to be careful because he could hang around long enough that it knocks him out of the Hall of Fame. And Russell Wilson, if he doesn't turn it around, Kurt Warner had this. Great year, Super Bowl, couple MVPs, went to 2 Super Bowls, then it started to dip. He had a donut hole. Was it the Giants? The guy who was 5-4 when they benched him for Eli Manning, went to Arizona, got back to a Super Bowl, so he rectified that dip. Russell Wilson needs to rectify that dip. If he doesn't, he could not make it to the Hall of Fame because it's a full body of work. He'd be better off retiring than continuing to put bad years up there. I think Sean Payton can do it. He lost weight. He needed to lose weight. He was too puffy last year. He needs to get some mobility back into his game. And Sean Payton is the master of constantly looking for a play that will work for my team against the defense I'm about to face. And he told a story on PFT Live earlier this year, and I've got the card at my barn. I was talking to him on the phone a couple of years ago. He's getting ready to play the Vikings. And I said to him, one of the things I love about your profession is you can spend as much time as you want looking for ideas and searching for plays and brainstorming. You can spend as much time as you want. And it's fascinating, but it's also kind of maddening because at what point do you stop? And he said to me, shit, you're making me nervous. I got to go. I got to get back to work. 5 minutes later, he called me back and he said, I found the play that will work on Sunday night. I'm going to write it up. I'm going to put it in the mail, and you watch the game Sunday night.
No way.
Wow. And you'll get this play, and I guarantee you at the right time I'm going to use it, and it's going to work. And I watched the game, and I wasn't sure. They won the game. They scored several touchdowns. I didn't know which play he was referring to, but he had a play that would work with his personnel against that Vikings defense, the way they run defense. So I'm asleep. It's a long day. You work 18-hour days during football season. The phone rings at 12:45, and I picked it up, and it said, Sean Payne. I said, motherfucker. I said, I know what he's calling about, and it can wait till tomorrow. And I went back to sleep, and the next day he called, and it's like, hey, I did it, and it worked. So my point is, he's a master at constantly looking for anything. Every week, he knows who he's facing, he knows what his team is and what his team can do, and he will always look for more, and he will give his whole life over to it. For a lot of things. And Tom Brady has articulated this, I think, on one of his documentaries, Tom versus Time. Remember that from a few years ago?
Yes.
If you want to compete with me, you have to give your life over to this, because you are not going to work harder than me. You aspire to work as hard as I do. You can aspire to put in as much as I put in, but to be great, and this applies to anything you do, if you truly want to be great, at some point you have to surrender all that shit you'd otherwise do, all those days you'd otherwise golf, all those movies you'd otherwise watch. You got to turn your life over to it and make it your obsession, especially during football season when it's coming at you one week at a time. That's why, one last point, and this is when I'm kind of down on Kirk Cousins. If you watch that quarterback series on Netflix,
it was awesome.
And he's got this thing about how I don't work on Tuesdays during football season. What are you talking? You got 8 months off.
Yes, it's crazy.
And when your opponents hear that, what do you think they say?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. He's not getting any better, right? Yeah. All right, Mike, so let's circle back to the AFC North, pretty popular division for this area, the people that listen to our show. Soup asked this question about the Steelers. Chris, you want to shoot a question towards it, Mike, about the Browns? Or
Mike, I feel your pain I'm a Browns fan and you're the Vikings, so neither of us have Super Bowls. And, I don't think the Browns have even been to a Super Bowl, but is there any reason that you can give me and even Matt, as a Browns fan, hope? Because I've drank the Kool-Aid for years, and every year I'm disappointed.
Chris was excited when they had Johnny Manziel. That's how optimistic he was.
He was drinking something other than Kool-Aid. It all comes down to whether or not Deshaun Watson can rewind the clock to 2020, the way he used to play. He was out a full year, missed 11 games last year. He's been dragged down by this off-field issue that was his own making. They spent all that money. They gave up those draft picks. What are they going to get out of Deshaun Watson? Who is he going to be? What is he going to be? And as he goes, they go. And if it doesn't work, Kevin Stefanski's going to be gone, because Deshaun Watson ain't getting fired. Not with $46 million per year, fully guaranteed, and 3 more years of it. What's interesting to me is if Watson sputters and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the kid they got from UCLA who fell in the draft, who's their number 2 guy now, if he develops and Watson struggles, at what point do you have a coach who says, we're on the hook for $46 million a year, we'll pay it, but we got this guy at a bargain basement contract for 3 years before he's even in a position to get a second contract. We're just going to ride with him. That becomes very interesting, but it all hinges on what we see September 10, Bengals at Browns. What Deshaun Watson are we going to see?
I think the Browns win that
and
game,
are they throughout the NFL? Are they kind of how are they viewed throughout, like the owners and the NFL in general, for that Watson contract?
Well, they got pissed at him.
Yeah,
they got pissed at him. Collusion happens in the NFL. They usually don't articulate it. After that Watson contract, you had guys like Steve Bisciotti of the Ravens, who eventually had to give Lamar Jackson a big contract, saying out loud, this complicates the way we do business. And that's dangerous, because under the collective bargaining agreement, it is a legitimate option for a team to use. So if teams are coming together and saying, we're not going to do that, you're engaging in collusion, and that's a no-no, and that can create all sorts of problems for the league. But they were very pissed at the Browns. They were very pissed at ownership. Generally speaking, though, there are 10 to 12 teams that are owned by dysfunctional owners. The other owners like it. The other owners prefer it. I was in the presence of one of the owners, and there were other people around, people from NBC, and one of the NBC people said to this owner, what do you think about Stephen Ross? He lives in New York. His team's in Miami. He splits time. He's not in the building every day. What do you think of that? And he said, I love competing with him. That's what these owners love.
Yes.
They don't, and that's one of the reasons I think they look the other way on Dan Snyder. They didn't want the standard they were going to apply to Snyder to apply to them.
But
that's
no
part
threat.
of it.
Yeah.
But also, if you get a highly competent owner, now you got to worry about Washington again.
Right.
Now it's going to be an impediment to your effort to try to win games and pursue championships, and that's what they all want. The line that we uttered the other day, because I say at one level, they're all winning. They can act like they want to win the Super Bowl. Look at the books.
Right.
They're all
They're
winning.
winning.
They're all winning. The question is who wins the Super Bowl. But for those guys, among those guys, they all still want to win. You want to stick it to the other guy. It's the line from Bruce Springsteen's Badlands. Poor man want to be rich. Rich man want to be king. King ain't satisfied until he rules everything. That's why they all want to beat each other, and it drives them crazy when they don't.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's awesome.
That's really
Yeah.
great breakdown. So real quick, again, AFC North. Is it the Bengals division to lose, obviously, or do you think that the Ravens or Steelers can contend? You mentioned the Browns. What needs to happen there?
Ravens are a wild card because they hired Todd Monken to be the offensive coordinator. And at some point along the way, somebody confused him with Bill Walsh.
Yeah, right.
He was your offensive coordinator in Cleveland, right?
Yeah.
And that was part of the problem.
Yes.
So the guy goes to Georgia for a couple of years. It whitewashes his resume, and all of a sudden he's the answer to the
Right.
problem. Now, we'll see if it works. I like that Todd Monken is involving Lamar Jackson in the crafting of plays and the creation of the offense, empowering him. Why weren't they doing that before? Makes no sense when you have a great quarterback. You want him to be involved. You want the benefit of his thoughts. Will it work? Here's the key. If you ever played Madden,
Yeah.
when you play Madden, you get that one play that you know works. When in doubt, that's what I'm going to do.
Yes.
And for the Ravens, the Madden play is 3rd and 6. Just let Lamar run.
it. Yeah.
Are they going to resist going with the Madden play, or are they going to stick to the offense and diversify and throw the ball? They really like Zay Flowers.
Yes.
They have OBJ. They got Mark Andrews. They got Isaiah Likely. They got some good running backs. They got an issue with J.K. Dobbins they got to work out. But 3rd and 6, is it going to be Lamar drops back, goes through his reads, and throws the ball to the open man, or is it Lamar runs and either does or doesn't get a first down? And more importantly, if you do it enough, Lamar runs and gets hit and gets hurt, and then he's gone for the last 5 weeks of the season.
Plus, it helps that you can get to the 50 and Justin Tucker can kick it from Wheeling
Yes.
to Bridgeport. Yes, that's always a good.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to have. All right, Mike, got to ask you a couple more things here. Big stories that are talk around the NFL right now. Everybody's talking about the Jonathan Taylor situation, and then will Nick Bosa get a contract extension with the 49ers anytime soon?
Well, I'll start with Jonathan Taylor. I think this is a situation where the owner of the team never wanted to give Jonathan Taylor a second contract. Chris Ballard, the GM of the team, would do it if he was allowed to do it. And Chris Ballard had some comments on Wednesday of this week about the situation. And when he was pressed, because Chris Ballard, the GM, said, you pay great players. Somebody finally asked him, if you pay great players, why aren't you paying Jonathan Taylor? And his response was, we won 4 games last year. Well, what the hell does that have to do with whether or not Jonathan Taylor's a great player that you should pay? You should be even more inclined to pay him because he's the only reason to come to the games.
Right.
I think in saying that, the takeaway is the owner of the team will not allow him to do it. Think back to Marshall Faulk, 1994 first-round pick of the Colts. Did they ever sign him to a second contract? No. They traded him to the Rams when the time had come for a second contract. Edgerrin James, the guy they drafted in round 1 to replace Marshall Faulk. He finished his rookie contract. He did 1 year under the franchise tag, and they let him walk away as a free agent. They never gave him a second contract. And I think what they were going to do with Jonathan Taylor, 4 years on his rookie contract, 1 year of the tag, 2 year of the tag, maybe, if he's still playing well enough, 2 year of the tag, and then see you later. That's what Jim Irsay wants to do. And now that Taylor has the ankle injury and he says he's experiencing pain, and is it pain or is it air quotes pain? They're not pushing him on it. Yeah. They put him on the physical unable to perform list. He can't play the first 4 games. And now the question is, will they trade him before October 31 or will they trade him in the offseason? But it feels like, bless you, it feels like this relationship is moving toward a divorce. Mm-hmm. What was the other one?
Bosa with the 49ers.
I'm surprised he hasn't signed yet.
Okay.
Look.
Trade him.
You just don't want him to play week 1.
No, he's going to give
Trade the Steelers. Same town, right. Just walk from one bus to the other. with these holdouts, and in any negotiation, what matters is having a mutual understanding of when the clock strikes 12. Because nobody moves to their bottom line until the clock strikes 12. If you move to your bottom line early, what happens?
You lose probably, huh?
What happens is when the clock strikes 12, you get pulled off of your bottom line, whatever it is. Well, now the clock is beginning the process of striking 12. It's like Cinderella, and it's going boom.
Turning into a pumpkin.
Boom, right. Now that we've arrived at the point where the two sides have to put their best offer on the table, is it going to connect? I don't know that they teach Venn diagrams in school anymore. I know when we were kids, they had Venn diagrams. Yep. All those two circles have to do is touch. Will they touch or will there be a gap? Then what do you do? And if the guy's dug in, he's not going to be there for week 1. And even at this point, whether it's Nick Bosa or Chris Jones of the Chiefs, if they walk through the door right now, are they really going to be ready for week 1? And do you want to put them out there when they may not be ready? So it's really thrown a wrench into the 49ers, and it's definitely thrown a wrench into the Chiefs. And we'll see if they get it done.
Tough. If Bosa's not there week 1, Najee, 20 touches, 140 yards, 2 touchdowns. Steelers win that game by 2 touchdowns. Let's go.
You can only dream, Soup.
Oh, it'd be great.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we've taken enough of Mike's time. I could sit here all night.
I could sit
fascinating
here all day.
stuff. But, Mike, we appreciate you taking the time out of your really busy day and busy time of year to spend it here with us here in the Pine Room studio.
Yeah, Mike, you're a friend of the show now, so whenever we call you, you have to come on. It's
okay.
We won't call you like Sean Payton.
Does it
like
make me enemy of the
Never.
show if I say no? Is it? Are you that finicky that if
never?
Well, we're going to give you some
turn this down.
loggers too, as a gift.
But thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck with the book, Father of Mine. If our listeners haven't read it yet, get out there, buy it, and
$4.99 ebook, $14.99 print. Yes.
So how many? Real quick.
What can you get for $4.99?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even the fast food. But when is it already begun with your busy schedule, or does it increase as it gets closer to the week 1?
Once camp opens, it all changes. My slow time is from after the draft, really after the off-season programs end in June. That's the dead time between middle of June and late July. When the camps open, it starts to crank up. Preseason starts, it starts to crank up. We did the Hall of Fame game in Canton, so it gave me kind of a dry run as to what the season's going to be like. Once the season starts, though, it is every waking moment, every day. I try to shut it down on Friday night and spend time with my wife and just get away from it. But, it's... and I'm not complaining because I used to have a real job. But I travel to Connecticut on Saturday. I do the full NBC thing on Sunday. I come home on Monday, and I'd like to maybe, just... and it's... Your reward for getting home safely is get your ass back to work. And it's just over and over and over again. And then the next thing you know, the season's over.
Yeah.
So in the dead time, can we head down to Bridgeport and spend some time, a little time down there with you?
No, bring your equipment down, mobile podcast studio. We can set up in the barn, and we can just do this down there.
Count us in.
Smoke a cigar while we're doing it.
Count us in.
And pop open a bottle cab.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes,
Whiskey in the barn. Whiskey in the barn.
Well, Mike, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. You're a really busy guy, and we're really lucky to have you. So thanks. Yeah, it was
great
an
to
honor.
be here. It's been a great day.
Best of luck with the book, and best of luck with everything this season. We'll be watching you on NBC and Pro Football Talk. Awesome
Thank you, guys.
Stuff.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again. Yep.